guys, I want to share with you today the 4 stages of scrupulosity recovery, and I think it's going to be an encouraging video. If you're watching this, it probably means you're at least halfway through those 4 stages. My house is under construction right now, so my office and the place where I usually record videos is totally messed up right now, and so you'll be joining me today on my back deck as I just make a very sort of casual video as we talk together. I want to share with you about these 4 stages of scrupulosity recovery. These are not from any sort of diagnostic manual. You guys know I'm not a psychologist, and I'm just sharing from my own experience working with hundreds of people that have scrupulosity and what I tend to see as the common signs of moving through a progression of stages. But the 4 stages that I'm going to share with you, actually the title of these 4 stages, it's not unique to me. I didn't make this up. I actually remember this from when I was in my inpatient recovery for depression and anxiety, and this was a sort of 4-step model that was used and showed to us as part of depression recovery. But I just really liked it so much, and I saw how much applicability it has also in scrupulosity recovery. So I just want to sort of unpack that for you guys. And again, I think this will be encouraging for you to just be able to see, like, hey, I am not at the beginning of the journey. Most of you are at least halfway or further through this process. Okay, so I'm, again, just very casual video. I've written some stuff out on a paper here. Our first stage that we go through is what we call unconscious incompetence. Now, unconscious incompetence means 2 things. It means that you are incompetent at your new ability to deal with and manage scrupulosity. So there's the incompetence aspect, but you're also unconscious of it. So what do we mean by unconscious? It means you have no clue what you're dealing with. You don't know, you've never heard of OCD before, you've never heard of scrupulosity, definitely not religious OCD. Maybe you have some ideas in your mind that obsessive compulsive disorder, oh, that's the hand washers, that's the people who are arranging their closet meticulously according to color codes. You, in stage 1, you do not have a recognition of the problem that you're dealing with, and you are still in this sort of religious la-la land where you're thinking that every thought that crosses through your mind, that must be the Holy Spirit. And you're thinking that every little, all the attention to detail that you're paying in the scrupulous matters of morality that are so hair-splitting, everybody tells you that doesn't make any sense, but you think it does make sense because you haven't reached the point of recognition that this is not God. Okay, and you guys know, if you've been listening to my videos or reading my blogs, you know that I am a big fan of like obedience to the Lord and growth in grace and holiness. And so I'm not the person that's sitting here wanting to tell you to say, foo-foo on everything that crosses your mind. Like, no, God does speak to us through His Word. God speaks to us in many different ways. But we have to reach a point, if you're a Christian that has obsessive compulsive disorder, we have to reach a point where we realize that some of the things crossing our mind is God speaking to us through principles of truth, and some of it is just the nonsense of our OCD. And when you are in stage 1, you do not yet have that recognition. You are completely incompetent at the ability to decipher that this is OCD sometimes, and you're unconscious of the fact that there's something wrong. So in stage 1, there tends to be a lot of over-spiritualizing, so everything becomes a spiritual matter. You may also, what I've noticed, when people retell their stories and we sort of identify this first stage and what's happening, I see that sometimes there can be like these breakthrough moments of anger and resentment towards God. But then there's a deep sense of shame because, again, in stage 1, we are not yet conscious of what the problem is that we're dealing with. And so for example, let's say that you have these religious compulsions that are squeezing you and pressing you till you feel like you're going to break, and you are dutifully following those compulsions because you really think it's God, and because it doesn't make any sense. And it's not actually God. God is a God of order. God is a God of sensibility, of reason, of truth. God is a good God, and God loves us. And He everything that He does for us is for our best good. And so that's a very different thing from the compulsions. The compulsions are not for our best good. The compulsions drive us crazy. I mean, we have people with scrupulosity that have had psychotic episodes. We have people that have gone into deep, dark depression. We've had people that have become suicidal. I know that there's people that I have worked with personally who have been homeless because they couldn't keep a job, and just like their family being torn apart, breaking up with boyfriends and girlfriends that they really did love and care about. So it wreaks havoc in our lives. When we go through these dark times where it's not just dark, but it's like not even making sense. I have to be careful here because obviously there are times in our spiritual lives where it's dark and doesn't make any sense and God is still with us. But what I mean with the OCD, I think you guys know, I think you guys are following me. Like there are times where it's just batty. It doesn't make any logical or psychological sense. That's what I mean. It doesn't make any psychological sense. And so we'll have these flash through moments of like anger and resentment towards God, but then we'll feel really, really ashamed of ourselves for feeling that. When my point of view on this is that often in stage 1, those flashes of resentment and anger can actually be a healthy thing because it is letting us know that something here is not right. Something is going on, and we need to maybe stop and listen to those gut feelings and ask ourselves, okay, is this really God? And again, it's a fine line to walk because obviously God will at times take us through valleys that we don't like, and we can feel angry with God legitimately just because we're sinful human beings. But it's a fine line to walk that sometimes the anger that you're feeling is a legitimate reaction against a psychological disease, and that's a good thing. You're feeling angry at God, but probably in stage 1 of scrupulosity recovery, you're not actually mad at God, you're mad at your OCD, which is masquerading as God. And so in that sense, it's a healthy anger to feel, and it can help propel you to find solutions. Stage 1, we often see that family members and friends are looking on, and they are recognizing that something is not right. One of our group members shared that it was her mom who found out that she had scrupulosity. I think I shared this in a previous video, but I just really like this example. And the reason her mom found out was because her daughter was just constantly engaged in agonizing spiritual activities that were only making her more and more miserable. That's actually a really common thing to see in stage 1. I want to tell you guys that moving from stage 1 to stage 2, I believe is the hardest. I'll just be honest with you guys. I don't really have a good way of helping people move from stage 1 to stage 2. Let me just tell you what that transition is, and then I think it'll make sense for you. Moving from stage 1, which is the unconscious competence, we then move to conscious incompetence. I hope I said that right. This becomes tongue twistery. In both stages, stage 1 and 2, we are incompetent. And that means that we are not able to deal with our OCD. We don't have the tools yet. We don't really have a grasp on how to live and manage our OCD. But the key difference is that in stage 1, you are incompetent of what's going on. And in stage 2, you now become competent. So I like to speak of stage 2 as sort of the awakening. That's an awakening to the condition that you have. It is a crucial, crucial transition, and it's one that cannot be forced. And like I said, I don't really know I don't have a perfect way of helping people understand that. I mean, that's one reason why I put a lot of blog posts and videos out, because hopefully somebody will be searching online of like, why am I always doubting my salvation? And maybe somebody will land on one of my blog posts where I'm talking about scrupulosity, that it is not an issue with your spirituality. It's an issue with your brain and the way that your brain processes information with chronic doubt and chronic uncertainty. And so there's a point in time when we do realize this is not normal and I don't think this is God, and we land on that website, or we talk to that counselor, or somebody talks to us about religious OCD, and all of a sudden we have a name for what we're going through. And there's sort of this mental awakening to, oh, I'm not crazy. There's other people like me out there. Oh, I thought I was just going nuts. And it's often, I will say this, it's often comforting but also disorienting at the same time. And let me explain that. It's comforting in the sense that in stage 2 we realize we're not alone and there isn't something terribly wrong with our walk with Jesus. But it's also disorienting because it means that we are questioning now, well, if it wasn't God talking to me with this and that, what if it wasn't God talking to me there either? And how do I know what to listen to in my head anymore? And does God even talk to me at all if I can't be sure? And in that sense, it can be a fairly, confusing and disorienting stage to go through. But it's really, really, I would say, the most important stage to go through. Sometimes I'll have people bring their loved ones to me. Generally, this scenario is like a parent bringing their teenager to me, and they'll say, please, my child has religious OCD, convince them. And I can't do that. Like the awakening in stage 2, it's just not something that can be forced on other people. You might be a family member that's watching this, and you might be so eager for your loved one to just wake up and realize that this is not real. And I will just encourage you and say, be patient, because it's something that cannot be forced. Unfortunately, we would like to rush things along, but we can't. Now, I know there can be in stage 2 like a big search for solutions in this stage, and that can be hard. Once we find out that we have OCD, we can get all OCD about trying to fix ourselves, and that's something we need to be careful about. We don't want to get obsessive about trying to fix our obsessive compulsive disorder, which is something that I plead guilty to. I have done that. I have in my group coaching session that I have twice a week, I have some older people. One of them emailed me some time ago and called himself an old dinosaur in the OCD recovery community. And we have people in their 70s that are joining us. And I just have so much sympathy for you if you are an older person, if you are one of the mothers in Israel or one of the dinosaurs of older eras. And the reason that I have extra sympathy for you is that it can be typical for people from previous generations to get stuck in stage 2. And that's because there haven't really been very good tools for dealing with OCD until more recently. So if you are 60, 70 years old and you've had OCD since you were a child, maybe you were diagnosed when you were like 15 or 12 or younger. But that was back in the 1960s, where people were still having really ineffective ways of dealing with OCD. So there you've had your awakening, you know you have OCD, but what do you do about it? And so you get stuck in stage 2, because again, stage 2 is where you are conscious of the problem, but you are still incompetent with solving it. And that's just a hard place to be stuck. So my heart goes out to the older members of the OCD recovery community who have known about it for a long time. Moving on to our 3rd stage, we've gone through the unconscious incompetence, where you have no clue what's going on and you are incompetent at solving your problem. Now you've become conscious of the problem, but you're still incompetent in dealing with it. That's stage 2. Stage 3 brings us to conscious competence. Let's break that apart. This can be one of the longest stages if you're not in that former category of older people with OCD. So with conscious competence, you begin healing. And this means that you have taken tangible steps forward in your recovery. Maybe you're working with a counselor or an OCD specialist, or you're starting to read lots and lots of books. Whatever the case is, you've started doing something for your recovery, and all of a sudden your toolbox is filling up, and you're starting to use those tools, and oh wow, you're discovering that those tools actually work. We talk about in our group coaching sessions things like putting your problem on ice and coming back to it in 24 hours. Many times you come back in 24 hours, the issue is not an issue anymore because it was just an emotional upheaval. It wasn't really a spiritual problem. So putting things on ice, that's one tool we talk about. When reading our Bibles, we talk about tools like not every verse in scripture was directed towards you personally. So reading your Bible, oh, now I can read my Bible and be a little bit less triggered when I'm reading things that are a little scary. So we have these tools that we add to our toolbox, and wow, they're starting to work. But here's the thing, here's why it's still called conscious competence. You're becoming competent at not responding to your OCD thoughts, not getting dragged into that spiral, but it's a very, very conscious effort. You have to think about what you're doing. It's not something that comes naturally. It's kind of like, if you decide, hey, I want to start drinking more water. Drinking water would be healthy for me. And yeah, in the beginning, when you try to establish that new habit, you keep forgetting to drink your water, right? And you might get a special glass that has markers on it for how much you drank. You might try to take regular trips to the water fountain at your work. But in the beginning, you're like forcing yourself constantly. Maybe you even have to put a reminder on your phone every hour, drink your water. This is an illustration that when you are trying to establish a new habit, it takes a lot of conscious effort to keep your mind and your actions going in the right direction. So the stage 3, conscious competence, can be a longer stage because there is a lot of effort involved in that. We can, in stage 3, see sort of this pendulum swing back and forth between over-engagement, which is often what we see in previous stages. We're like constantly over-engaged, over-spiritualizing. Oh, this is God, I have to react immediately. But now that you've realized, oh, not everything that sounds like God is actually God, there can be this pendulum swing over to sort of a place of avoidance where you're like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm just so overwhelmed. I'm so burned out from all of this. I can't handle this. I'm not going to read my Bible right now. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to pray. I just can't handle this right now. It's too much. And so there can be this avoidance where you don't want to do any of it because it's just sort of sometimes there can be almost a sense of jadedness that can creep in. There's more breakthrough anger and shame as you're dealing with the spiritual burnout, but now it's more of an anger that's more directed towards it's a complicated anger because you're like angry at God, but you're angry at your OCD and you don't know how to extricate those two from each other. So it can be a little bit more thorny to deal with in the later stage because now you know what OCD is. Anyways, that it can just be an ugly sensation to have. A lot of people email me and they're like, oh no, Jamie, I feel like I'm angry at God and maybe that's the unpardonable sin. Okay guys, being angry at God is not the unpardonable sin. We got lots of people in scripture who were angry at God and they dealt with it. They talked with him and they moved through it together, and that's just a problem solving and emotional openness experience with God that I think is healthy for all of us. But anyways, I just want to say that when we get to stage 3, almost everybody goes through a sense of disillusionment. And if you didn't go through it in stage 2, you're definitely going to get to it in stage 3. I hardly know anybody who's recovered from scrupulosity who has not at some point gone through a sense of disillusionment. And I'm guessing that it's more common in stage 3 than in stage 2. So there can be feelings of like betrayal by God. Why did he allow this? Why did I waste so many years of my life? Why did I make so many dumb decisions based on my OCD? Listening to the intrusive thoughts, the false impressions. Like, I made such a fool of myself. Why did God allow this? So there can definitely be sort of that sense, and it can be one of the hardest parts of this stage. So I want to say that there can be some swinging back and forth between the conscious incompetence and the conscious competence. In other words, you know you got the problem in both stages, but in stage 2, you're not actually being successful in dealing with it, but in stage 3, you are. Okay, so there can be some pendulum swing back and forth between those two. So on Monday you wake up and you do all your compulsions because you're just really anxious on Monday morning, and oh no, I did my compulsions, I'm not supposed to do that. Okay, tomorrow I'm gonna try again. Tuesday morning, you wake up and you're like, I'm going to give this my best shot. I'm going to, implement all the tools in my toolbox, and you kind of make it halfway through Tuesday, and then by Tuesday afternoon, you do your compulsions again. Back to stage 2. Wednesday morning, it kind of just goes on like this, and you kind of swing back and forth between I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing, but then I'm not. Then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm not, right? So it can go back and forth. Lest I make this video too long, let me quickly go to stage 4. Okay, we've had our unconscious incompetence, our conscious incompetence, conscious competence. We talked about all 3 of those. Stage 4 is where we're all longing to be, which is unconscious competence. Guys, I just want to say, for me, OCD management and what we call recovery, really what we're looking at is habits that we're forming. Positive mental habits that help us not respond to the OCD at all anymore. It's not bothering us, we're not responding to it, it's there maybe running in the background, but I prefer to think about recovery in terms of tasks that we're successfully completing. We are not responding to our obsessions and compulsions. We are living life normally. Because we're not responding to the obsessions and compulsions, our emotional reactions are way down and we're not as anxious as we were. But we're talking about competence with a series of tangible, attainable tasks, okay? And those are predominantly gained through the tools that you implement, that you can learn. We have in my online masterclass is just one out of many places you can learn them. I'm not, here putting a pitch for that only. You guys can go to No CD. A lot of my clients work with them. You can go to local counselors. You can go to online websites. There are so many things on YouTube, so many books you can read. There are resources out there. And when we are adding to our toolbox regularly for OCD management and recovery, we get to this place, this golden, wonderful place, where we are now competent at dealing with our OCD, but it has become so second nature that it now becomes unconscious. To go back to my water drinking illustration from earlier, when you start to build that new habit and all of a sudden water drinking becomes second nature to you, and you just kind of reach for your water bottle and you take a drink while you're working at your computer without even thinking about it. You're getting your water, you're doing what that habit is that you're trying to implement without really thinking about it. That's where we want to get with this unconscious competence. That is stage 4. And again, you can bounce back and forth between the conscious competence and the unconscious competence quite a few times as you're still figuring out how to make this stuff second nature. So in my case, I consider myself to be in stage 4 of recovery. For the most part, my OCD is just very well managed. I'm pretty unconscious about having to deal with it. Every so often, something will come up, an intrusive thought or an obsessional line of thinking, and I have to be like, oh, wait a second, what am I supposed to be doing here? Oh yeah, that's right. So every now and then I'll bounce back to having to consciously think about, what do I need to be doing right now? Because this thought is like a little bit of an uncomfortable thought. What do I do with it? Oh, okay, that's what I do with it. But it really, I think when you get to stage 4, for the most part, even though there's a little bouncing back and forth, but generally speaking, you're going to be unconscious of the tools that you're implementing. It's at that point that one thing I want to mention here, when you get to stage 4, it doesn't mean you're perfect, but there's often a sense of emotional and spiritual resolution, of just feeling things are resolved and sort of a closure between you and God. So in stage 2 and 3, there was that disillusionment, either stage 2 or stage 3 or both, maybe. You might go through this jaded, apathetic, angry, disillusionment feeling with God. In stage 4 is generally when we start to have closure and a sense of like, I'm okay with that. I understand what God was doing. I can see that God had a purpose for that. And I've grown so much closer to him. Almost everybody that I've worked with that's kind of come through all the way to stage 4 will get to a point where they will say, I am grateful for my OCD because of everything that it's taught me. And that is a sign for you that you are in stage 4 at least some of the time. And again, there can be bouncing back and forth as we're really attaining to that level of recovery. But if you've started to have that sort of closure with the whole OCD experience, and you're feeling a reunion with God, sort of like a post-OCD reunion with God, which is so beautiful. If you've experienced that, I think you know what I'm talking about. But that is something that comes in stage 4. So if you've had those feelings, be happy, because it means that you're really coming to the end of your journey. Again, with stage 4, you can expect very reduced anxiety, reduced OCD symptoms. There may be flare-ups, there may be seasons where it's a little bit worse, but generally speaking, you're going to be going through life fairly unconscious of, the issue that you dealt with in the past. And OCD becomes just another chapter of your life, not something that you have to think about every day. Is OCD something that we always have to be aware of, that it needs management? Yes, I do believe that if you've had an OCD diagnosis, probably for the rest of your life, you're going to have to be aware of that vulnerability. So if you get to really anxious seasons in life, maybe you have a lot of loss or grief or stress or medical emergencies, you should just kind of poke yourself and be like, hey, don't forget, you have this vulnerability and you need to watch and have your toolbox ready in case it decides to give you a nice little flare-up. But overall, once you've gone through stage 4, I think you can expect to be fairly unconscious of management going forward. So be encouraged, guys. It doesn't last forever. You're not going to be dealing with all of these thoughts forever. My big encouragement to you is wherever you are, whatever resources you have available, please avail yourself of them and just keep adding to your toolbox. Keep putting forth the effort. I know there's some people that are looking for, one of my clients the other day, she called it the it button, of like, oh, if I can just put my finger on it, like that's it, that's my solution, and it's gonna be like this light bulb goes off and there's confetti and fireworks, and like my OCD has been healed with the it button. There's no it button, unfortunately. What we're dealing with is just a long progression of building new habits and implementing new tasks in our mental life. And that's really what OCD recovery is like. So I want to encourage you guys to, first of all, don't be feeling like this is something that has to stretch on forever. The brain is incredibly malleable. God has given us minds that work in incredible ways. You can grow and you can move through this. But the other point that I want to encourage you about is to just make sure that you have tools that you're actually working on and not looking for an it button. Okay, so may God bless each one of you, and thanks for joining me out here on my deck. I think it's going to be a couple months till my new office is finished, so you'll have to hang out with me here again. So we'll see you back next week, and I wish you all of God's blessings.